Hello, everybody. Welcome, SpinSheet fans. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to another episode of the SpinSheet Happy Hour and my living room. Wanted to just tell you we've got a great episode show tonight. Was that? I don't know if that makes sense. But before we do that, got to thank our sponsor, of course, Mount Gay Rum, once again coming through for us and sponsoring us. And what we've got here, I wanted to say that Mount Gay, not only have they sponsoring this, but they have sponsored, most of the SpinSheet Happy Hours, and it's been great to have them here. So, as I said before, if you need to pick up something to make a little cocktail for, well, pick up some Mount Gay, and you'd be helping them, and you help us. So, without further ado, I'm going to bring on Molly. Hey, Molly.
Hey, Shar. Happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday.
Welcome back to SpinSheet Happy Hour.
Yeah. And a Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a snowy Happy New Year.
Right.
I swear I bought a snow shovel like 4 years ago, and I used it for the first time this week.
Mm-hmm.
And I used it seriously because that first snowfall that we had was that was some thick stuff.
We got dumped on.
I like how you go to shovel it and then you couldn't get it off the shovel, and that was a workout. Today it was a little wimpier. It was much more of that little like use your broom kind of snow, but it was pretty. I like it.
It was pretty. I learned the hard way though when you have the brush and all that kind of stuff. Don't leave it in your car.
Yeah.
Like, if you know it's going to snow, take it out.
That actually is a mistake that I made this week when I was locked out of my car. It was iced out of my car, and that's where all the scrapers and brushes were. So yeah, good point. Good point. But I gave up. I don't need to go anywhere anyway. I drive a very tiny car, and I have nice colleagues who have big trucks who will come pick me up when somebody around here has a big truck. So anyway, here we are back to SpinSheet Happy Hour. We have a really exciting program tonight. Our friend Mark Thornton from Lake Erie. I should have asked him how you pronounce that. Is it just LakeErieWX Marine Weather, or do you just say Lake Erie Marine Weather? We'll have to ask Mark when we get him on here.
So we can do that.
But anyway, we were introduced to Mark through our friends at Cruisers University. That section of cruising seminars that's held between the Annapolis. Well, it depends on the order. The Annapolis Sailboat Show and the Annapolis Powerboat Show. In this case, this year it was flip-flopped. But anyway, he's been teaching there for a number of years, weather forecasting. And this program tonight, by the way, for anyone who's tuning in, this is not a program just for sailors. What Mark has to say would apply to all boaters, and powerboaters, and paddlers, and anyone who spends time on the water. So share it to your Facebook page and see if we can bring in some other boaters and not just be. And Mark's a sailor, full disclosure, he is a sailor. But first and foremost on this program, he's a weather expert. He's a forecasting expert, and he has some stuff to teach us. And I'm excited.
Of all the things that they teach you and all the classes and stuff, weather was the hardest for me.
Yeah. No one ever taught me that in a class. So you took a class on weather?
I took a class. And I think that you can talk all about, how to tie knots and how to navigate, all that kind of stuff. Weather, But I think Mark is a great teacher from what everyone says. He's got a great reputation. So I'm really excited about the show.
Yeah, I am too. Let's bring him on.
Let's bring him on. Here we go. Hey, Mark.
Hey there.
Hi, Mark. Welcome to SpinSheet Happy Hour. Thanks for being our guest tonight.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, we haven't compared our cocktails yet.
Oh yeah.
I'm excited to start because I actually got a mixer for mine, and which I have not had for a while. So I had to drink wine one time because I didn't have any mixers in the fridge, and I'm not a straight rum drinker. But anyway, I have some mango juice, and I've added a little bit of, I did put a little seltzer water in there. And Mount Gay, of course. So I'm having a Mount Gay mango kind of summery, punchy drink. You know, what gives it that regatta tent feel.
Nice.
It's delish. Anyway. How about you? What are you having over there in Eastport, Chris?
I've got my standby Mount Gay and ginger in a mason jar.
Mason jar.
It's always a mason jar over there.
How
about you, Mark? Actually, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Westlake, Ohio, which is just west of Cleveland.
Okay.
And I have an Elliott Ness. It's a beer from a local brewery. Elliott Ness was he was with the Untouchables. Remember?
Oh, cool.
And he was ultimately responsible for catching Al Capone.
Oh.
So he got his start here in Cleveland. He was the safety director here in Cleveland for a number of years before he moved to Chicago. Mm-hmm. So kind of in honor of that, the local brewery has a lager that they make with his face on it.
Cool.
Or a likeness. It's not his face, a likeness.
Is it an IPA or is it a lager?
It's an amber lager.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah, it's really
very
good.
Wintry.
Yes, I like that.
That's good. You know, I knew you were in the Cleveland area, but I didn't know exactly where. Are you right? Are you very close to Lake Erie or on the lake?
We're about 3 miles south of Lake Erie.
Okay.
So.
I grew up sailing on Lake Erie as a kid, so up out of Erie, Pennsylvania. So anyway, I'm very fond of the lake. And,
it's a great place to sail. You know, anyone who hasn't ever sailed in the Great Lakes should try it sometime.
Yeah. Great. I see some of our regulars have popped on. I love how Mark Burrows always calls us the Spinnies.
I was going to say that. Like,
hi, Mark. Thanks for calling us Spinnies. He just made it up, the Spinnies.
Yeah. I don't know how I feel about that. It might grow on me, but
yeah, I like it. I like it. So, Sharp, are you going to go behind the scenes and play Man Behind the Curtain?
I am going to do exactly that. So I will see you guys a little bit later.
Okay, good. Right. Well, we look forward to it. And Mark, you and I are going to talk about weather. And,
all right.
But let's start first. You know, can you just tell us a little bit about your background, how you got it? First of all, how you got into sailing and boating in general. That's something we ask all of our guests when they're first on the program.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in central Illinois in a little town in the middle of the cornfield. So there wasn't a lot of sailing there. So right after high school, I actually started paddling. So I was a long time canoeer. And then through a couple job changes, ended up in Cleveland, got married. We went to the Cleveland Boat Show and just wandering around and on a lark, bumped into the local Flying Junior fleet. And they were doing recruitment. And they said, look, you buy a boat, and they were very reasonably priced, and come out to the lake. We'll teach you how to sail. I had never sailed. We'll teach you how to sail. And like, well, why not? And so we bought a Flying Junior and sailed that for several years, and then slowly worked our way up until now we have a CNC 35 that we sail on the lake. Mm-hmm. So kind of a transition from something very small to a larger sailboat in the span of, well, I won't say how many years, but a long time.
Yeah. Were there boats in between? Was there a progression of boats that took you to
There was. Yeah. We, from the FJ, we had a 23-foot centerboard sailboat that we had on the lake. And it only took one summer to realize that was sort of woefully small for Lake Erie. And so from there, we went to a CNC 29, which we really, really liked, and had that for about 10 years, 12 years. And we were we've been going to the Annapolis boat shows since the early 90s. It's kind of was our fall pilgrimage. And I would always go wander around Eastport. So I was wandering around Eastport, and in one of the boat yards, I saw an CNC 35 for sale. I'm like, interesting. So I went up to the window, and I couldn't believe the price. It was really, reasonably priced. And I'm like, what the heck? We should look at it. Well, you know what happens next. Once you look, And then we made an offer, and next thing you know, we're moving a boat from Annapolis up to Lake Erie. So that was 2006. So this will be our 16th or 17th season with that boat.
Mm-hmm. And you found that it was reasonably priced. Was there a catch? Or they were just ready to sell it, so they decided to put it, out there?
Yeah, they were ready to sell it. They were an older couple. She was a teacher at a university there in Severna Park. And so they were relocating back to Rochester, I think, where they kind of grew up.
Yeah.
And so they weren't going to be taking the boat. They were going to be retiring from sailing. And so I think they were sort of interested in selling the boat fairly quickly to somebody who would continue to use it.
Yeah.
They were a really interesting couple. I had dinner with them a couple times, through the course of the cleaning all the stuff out of their garage. I had to actually rent a large U-Haul truck to get all of the stuff back here to Cleveland, all the extra sails and equipment that they had. They were a great couple, and so we're very pleased about the whole transition and stuff. It's been a great boat for us.
Yeah, I'm sure they were too. It's a funny thing about selling boats, right? You feel better about selling your boat to someone who's actually going to use it.
Yeah, it's a caretaker. You need to sell it to a caretaker who will continue to take care of it.
Yeah. Okay. And before we get into weather, can you tell me how you pronounce your company name?
Oh, LakeErieWX Marine Weather.
Okay, you do pronounce WX. Okay,
Yeah.
LakeErieWX Marine
But,
Weather. For anyone who's just tuning in, we are talking to Mark Thornton of LakeErieWX Marine Weather, and that's his website. He has a Chesapeake Bay dashboard for marine weather resources. So, what sparked your interest in weather forecasting, Mark? Can you tell us how you got into it and how you got into doing seminars?
Yeah, it was really sailing. I'd been sailing for a number of years on the lake, and like most sailors, was sort of continue to be perplexed why very often the conditions that we were sailing in were so much different than the marine forecast. And so in trying to sort that out, I stumbled upon an ad in a magazine for an online weather class, and it was offered through Penn State. So I did a little research and found out that Penn State was one of the leading universities for weather forecasting. It's like, well, that's good. So it's not a a two-bit offering. So then I called the professor, who was kind of the lead professor of the class, and his enthusiasm for the topic was infectious. So I signed up. It was just a one-semester class, and just loved it. And as that class was ending, they were sort of in the stages of trying to put together a longer program, a 2-year program that would be a graduate certificate program in weather forecasting. And they were looking for sort of a small group of students to go through the program initially to kind of take it for a test drive. So I thought, well, heck, I liked the first class so much, I'll sign up for the rest of it. And it was just an extraordinary experience. The quality of the teaching and the quality of the materials. Met a bunch of great people. And in fact, I graduated in the fall of 2006, and I'm still involved with the program. About 10 years ago, I was hired to be a teaching assistant in the program, in the introductory class. I know people say this all the time, but it changed my life. Weather forecasting was so much different than what I did for my day-to-day job. So it really offered me, an outlet for my spare time. And now that I'm retired, it really provides a great outlet for, keeping me, I'm never short of something to do, either researching things or putting seminars together or so forth. It's been wonderful. Great. It's a great program.
Well, that's good. It's especially good for us that we had a chance to meet you, because SpinSheet readers and Prop Talk readers, we might have some of our Prop Talk readers on because they're powerboaters, but we're all kind of crazy about weather. And I noticed that, whenever I put anything on the Facebook page, something fun or something silly, and it might just be like, show us I posted something 2 days ago. Show us your boat covered in snow. And but especially when it has to do with weather forecasting, there was a funny one up the other day that was, here we are in Maryland, the snow forecast is somewhere between 0 and 78 inches, maybe.
I saw that.
Yeah, and that's pretty typical of our weather forecasts in winter here. But those are some of the most shared posts that we ever have out there, because I think you have to be a little obsessed with weather if you're going to be a sailor for any length of time. And if you don't become interested in weather, you're probably not going to stay a sailor for very long, because you're going to get whomped by a couple of storms.
Right.
And, you'll eventually think, forget this. This could be a very unpleasant sport.
Right. Well, and actually, weather forecasting makes you a much better boater, a much better sailor. If you're trying to, harness the wind, learning some weather forecasting is a real advantage, beyond obviously just keeping, you and your crew safe.
Yeah. Well, great. We spoke a little bit on the phone about using a forecasting funnel. And that was an interesting concept, for your forecasting routine. Can you explain how that works, what that means?
Sure. So this is sort of a basic concept in forecasting, is that you should always start with the large scale weather features. As boaters, we tend to sort of focus on what the wind and wave forecast is and really sort of obsess on that. And if you start there, what you've done is you've skipped understanding the large scale dynamics that are creating that local wind and wave. You don't understand the why. You might understand the forecast, but not the why of, why the conditions are going to be like they are. So the forecast funnel, if you can imagine sort of an inverted funnel with the base of the funnel, or with the base of the triangle at the top and the narrow end of the funnel at the bottom, it suggests that you start at the large scale, looking for the areas of high pressure and low pressure, and where the cold fronts and warm fronts are, and where it's going to rain or not rain or storm. And then you slowly start working your way down more to the region, what's the large scale weather features in your region. And then the last thing you look at is the wind and wave forecast. And if you follow that process, then you understand the why. And where that really pays a huge dividend is when, with a forecast, let's say that you're expecting a wind shift in the middle of the afternoon, and you've looked at the large scale forecast, and you know that wind shift is related to the passage of a cold front. So you're out sailing, and that wind shift, it's not happening. It's like, where's the wind shift? Well, if you've looked at the big picture and followed the forecast funnel, that cold front must be running a little behind. It's slowed down. May still be coming. It's just a little bit later than what we thought. So start with the big picture first, and it will dramatically improve your wind and wave forecasts.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the basics of low pressure systems and how they form?
Sure. So I guess maybe the best place to start is with a sort of a quick definition of barometric pressure. So the layer of the atmosphere where weather happens is about 6 miles thick. And so while we're obviously very concerned about what happens at the surface, most of the dynamics that cause weather are happening through that very deep layer aloft. So barometric pressure is just simply the weight of all the air molecules over a given area. So an area of low pressure has fewer air molecules than an area of high pressure. It's really simple. It's just about weight. So an area of low pressure essentially forms when two air masses butt up against one another. So imagine, a large area of very cold and dry air, maybe down from Canada, and then a separate air mass from, let's say, the Gulf of Mexico. So it's going to be a lot warmer and a lot moister. And those two air masses meet somewhere. And where they meet, the first stage of a low pressure system is the formation of a stationary front, which probably everybody's heard of. So that marks the boundary between those two air masses. And so now the stage is sort of set. And aloft about 20,000 feet up or so, there are weather features that promote the removal of air molecules above that stationary front. So now it's removing mass and air molecules, so the pressure is decreasing. It's the first stage of forming a low pressure system. You've got to essentially pull air out of that air column. So once that starts to happen, you start to get the counterclockwise wind field that forms around low pressure areas. So when that starts to develop a little bit, the air west of that low starts to move towards the south. So that's the beginnings of the cold front. To the east of the area of low pressure, the cold air starts to retreat, allowing warm air to advance. That's the beginnings of the warm front. And so as that process continues for a little bit, then you end up with a full-fledged mature low pressure system of the center low, a cold front, a warm front, and a counterclockwise wind field. But the real key is that feature aloft that removes air mass or removes mass from that air column to allow the low pressure system to get created.
Cool. I've never heard it explained that way. I'm hearing a little bit of an echo and I'm not sure if maybe Shard, that is you, your phone giving an echo, but anyway, it's just my own voice. Luckily, I'm not having one with Mark's voice. And for anyone who's just tuning in, we're talking to Mark Thornton from LakeErieWX Marine Weather, and Mark is going to be doing a seminar that we're going to host starting in February, 3 different sessions, February 24th, March 3rd, and March 10th. And we'll give you a link to sign up for that if anyone is interested in it. But tonight he's going to be talking about thunderstorms in his seminar. But tonight we're talking a little bit more generally about weather forecasting and how it applies to boaters. So anyone who has a question for Mark, please put it in the comments and we will get to it eventually. And in the meantime, I'll just keep asking Mark my questions, but feel free to throw in a question at any time. And if it's not exactly where we are, we will get to it a little bit later. So in introduction to wind forecasting, I mean, wind doesn't just affect sailors. It really affects anglers. You know, in paddlers. I was complaining this summer a bunch of times I went to go paddling and it was just too windy for the type of board that I have. It wasn't going to be safe or fun for me a lot of times. And I was complaining about it to Lenny Rudo, is the editor of Fish Talk, our fishing magazine. And he said, "Oh, tell me about it." Because rough on his fishing when it gets that windy. And then sailors were really happy we had all this wind. But in fact, sometimes it was a little too windy for sailors too. So it was kind of a tough summer for that. So give us a little introduction to forecasting. How can we know when that's coming?
Sure. So I guess the place to start is to know that the weather that you're paddling in or sailing in or fishing in is sort of a combination of sort of large scale dynamics and local effects. So local effects are things like, the terrain, the water temperature, what the land is, next to the water, whether it's city or farmland or cement or so forth. And so this is sort of a perfect opportunity then to go back to that forecast funnel, to start with the large scale dynamics first. And on a very basic level, wind flows counterclockwise and inward around lows and clockwise and outward around highs. And with the passage of every sort of frontal boundary, a stationary front, warm front, cold front, it doesn't matter, the wind almost always veers with the passage of that front. Sometimes a little, sometimes it may be sort of hard to notice. And sometimes it can switch 80, 90 degrees, switch from southerly to westerly in the matter of 20 minutes with the passage of a cold front. So this is where, if you want to really do a good wind forecast and, get a sense of, the conditions in your local area, start with that surface weather map, find out where the highs and lows are, find out what frontal boundaries are going to be passing. One way to tell how windy it's going to be from a large-scale surface weather map is to look at the closeness of the isobars. And those are the contours that sort of weave all around the map. And those contours are called isobars, and they're just contours of barometric pressure. And they're at intervals of 4 millibars, so the intervals are always the same on the National Weather Service maps. And so when the isobars are close together, it generally indicates that the wind is going to be faster than an area where the isobars are further apart. So right now, if you jumped out and looked at a weather map, there's sort of a nor'easter raging in the northeastern part of the country. Look at the isobars on that surface weather map. They'd be very close together, suggesting how windy it is up there, versus look somewhere else in the country where the isobars are further apart. So that would be where I would start, with the large-scale weather map. If the large-scale dynamics are strong, so let's say there's a low pressure system coming, and a cold front is going to pass, that's largely the wind dynamic that you're going to be paddling or sailing in. When the large-scale weather pattern is very weak, so let's say you've got a huge dome of high pressure over the Chesapeake, the large-scale winds are very, very light, then that's when the local dynamics take over. Sea breezes, affected by the temperature of the water, the temperature of the land, the shape of the coastline, if there are clouds or there are not clouds. Those very localized features are very difficult to forecast, because they're very small, and if you're using a weather app to do a wind forecast, which probably almost everybody is doing these days, those features are almost too small to even be properly modeled with your weather app. So that's where it really pays to sort of soak up the local knowledge of what the wind patterns are like in your area. In fact, it's the best way to, improve your performance at a regatta is if you can get there a day early or 2 days early, do that, do some sailing, try to get a sense of what, the winds are like in a local area. And one strategy that I used to do is you get there a couple days early, have dinner at the bar at the local yacht club, and just start chatting up the locals about what the wind is like. And they will share everything they possibly know about the local wind effects. But start with the large scale dynamics, determine whether it's large scale or local scale is going to be in force, and sort of take your forecast from there.
We have a couple questions from the audience. Sharp, if you could save Greg Guthman's question, because that's already on my list. So we're going to just push his off for a little bit. We're going to get to you, Greg. We know you're here. Thanks for asking questions. And let's go with Ron Chazinski's question here. Can you explain the importance of the 500 millibar? I'm saying that right?
Yes.
Forecast as long as low pressures are steered. Thanks
Yes.
for tuning in, Ron. Thanks for your question.
Right. Great question. So when I was back talking about the formation of the low pressure systems and talk about, there were dynamics at 20,000 feet that, prompted the formation of the low, that is at the 500 millibar level that's mentioned in Ron's question. So the features that are really important, occur at that level. And so meteorologists are looking at 500 millibar charts to determine if the dynamics are appropriate there or supportive of the formation of surface low pressure systems. Technically speaking, the dynamics at 500 millibars don't steer the surface low pressure systems. It's a little more nuanced in that the dynamics at 500 millibars allow that low pressure system to form and continue to survive and develop. But it's really sort of a dance between sort of what's going on at the surface and where the air columns are warming, that low, in fact, technically speaking, the low doesn't even actually move. It's almost sort of just redevelops in another area. It's really interesting, in the sense, in fact, many meteorologists will tell you that an aerial low pressure is something that doesn't truly exist. You can't put your hands on it. It's sort of this odd area, and then that odd area just reforms. But the dynamics at 500 millibars are very, very important in determining where the lows form, how deep the low pressure becomes, whether that becomes a very intense low. The term that gets kicked around now is the bomb cyclone. Whether that low pressure system is going to bomb or not. And bombing means it's just the pressure is falling at greater than 1 millibar an hour over a 24-hour period. All of that depends upon what's happening at 500 millibars.
Let's take Betty Caffo's question. Do weather forecasters use the same terms as sailors regarding veering and clocking wind?
Well, not clocking, because I guess most meteorologists and most sailors I know use backing and veering. So, if you were, let's say we're facing south and the wind is blowing in our face, that's a southerly wind. So if the wind moves to the southeast, that is a backing wind. If the wind moves to the southwest, that is a veering wind. So a veering wind moves in a clockwise direction, and a backing wind moves in a counterclockwise direction.
Thomas Dean has 2 questions. Let's take the, Is the NES surface forecast as good as or better than apps such as Predict Wind?
I'm assuming he's meaning NWS, National Weather Service. I'll answer the question, presuming that's what he means, because I'm not sure what NES would be. Yes, the thing to remember with the surface forecast that you'll get from an entity, it's called the Weather Prediction Center. It's part of the National Weather Service. And that shows the isobars and the frontal boundaries and where rain and thunderstorms are going to happen. That map is essentially drawn by professional meteorologists. So they might have 30 or 40 years of experience. They're looking at all the weather forecast data that's out there, all the model information out there. And they are using their experience to determine what's going to happen and what's likely not to happen, and draw the map appropriately. So when you're looking at a surface weather map from the National Weather Service, you're getting the added value of the experience from that professional forecaster. When you're looking at a map from Predict Wind or any of the apps, it doesn't really matter who you're talking about. There are no meteorologists involved in that process. It's straight from the computer to you. So there is enormous value in looking at the analyzed maps from the National Weather Service, because you get the professional forecaster on your team.
Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and take Thomas Dean's second question. Are low pressure systems more powerful than high pressure? Will a low move a high out of its way?
There's sort of a different way of thinking about this. It's that you have to, I guess, think about weather as, it circles the globe. It has really no beginning and no end, right? It's just a fluid that circulates around the globe. And as that process is happening, the highs and lows that are moving around the world all the time they're all in motion. And so the surface highs and surface lows don't move one another out of the way. You have to think further higher up in the atmosphere and look at the dynamics that control where those low pressure systems form and how intense they are. There's a corollary that those dynamics aloft also control where the areas of high pressure form. It's almost completely opposite of the dynamics I talked about with surface low pressure. And it's that whole fluid body. Think of it as water. I mean, the atmosphere is a fluid just like water is. Think about, the whole ocean of air moving around the globe, and the highs and lows are moving together. They're not pushing one another out of the way.
For anyone who's just tuning in, we're talking to Mark Thornton of LakeErieWX Marine Weather. And Tara Flanagan from Cruisers University just hopped on to let us know that both Mark and Fish Talk editor Lenny Rudo will be teaching at the Spring 2022 Cruisers University, which is April 28th through May 1st. And you can find that at AnnapolisBoatShows.com. And she added that Mark's Master Marine Weather class is one of the most popular classes on the schedule. So thank you for that, Tara. For anyone who has never heard of Cruisers University, it's really become quite an institution connected to Annapolis Boat Show. It's funny, I still think of it as new, but it's 10 years or it's been around for at least 10 years. And so anyway, it's quite popular. We have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm just going to keep addressing them, even if it takes us a little off track, Mark.
Right.
Nancy Davis asked a question. How do you conduct weather routing for a multi-day passage?
Oh, I was hoping this question would come up in the queue. Yeah, this has gotten much easier over the last several years, in that many of the weather apps, like Predict Wind or Luck Grib, which is just for iOS, or Expedition, are software programs that actually allow you to let the computer calculate what the fastest route would be to your destination. And essentially how this works is they take in data files of weather information. They're called GRIB files, G-R-I-B, very small data files that contain weather forecast information. So the software pulls that in, so that's the weather portion of it. The next piece is that you need your polar diagram. And so this is just essentially the specifications of how fast your boat sails in certain wind speeds and a certain angle off the wind. Then you tell the software where you want to start and where you want to go and when you want to leave. And then the software chunks the data, excuse me, to calculate the fastest route using the wind forecast and the sailing characteristics of your boat. You can put parameters in there if you prefer to avoid certain wind speeds. If you don't want to sail in more than 25 knots, you can put a parameter in there for 25 knots. If you want to motor sail at less than 4 knots, you can put that in and it will turn on motor sailing. And it will route you then around areas where the wind speeds might be more than you want to sail in. So it's made weather routing far easier, but there's lots of caveats here. The accuracy of that routing is only as good as the weather forecast. Right? Because if the weather forecast is wrong, the routing will be equally as wrong. And it's also dependent upon if you can actually sail the boat to your polars. And many of the software have the ability to scale your polars. If you're double handing and you're thinking we can only sail the boat at 70% of its capability, you can put that in the routing and it will take that into consideration. Very powerful way of doing weather routing now, but just keep those caveats in mind. It's only as good as the weather forecast model.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk a little bit about wave forecasting?
Sure.
Just a little introduction to wave forecasting. That doesn't affect us as much on the Chesapeake Bay as it does out in the ocean, but it certainly does if you're on the smaller your boat, you get out in the middle of the bay, and especially out, I don't know, sort of south of Solomons. I've been in some rough days there, and in front of the Potomac River in particular is a bit of a washing machine. So
yeah, we interestingly here on Lake Erie, a little bit before Thanksgiving, we had a big nor'easter. Winds were 35, 40 knots with gusts into the 50s. And we had 17-foot waves with a 6-second period. If you can imagine, like
17 waves.
17-foot wave every 6 seconds, unbelievable. So if you're venturing out on the water, wave forecasts are really, really important. The key really to an accurate wave forecast is an accurate wind forecast, because obviously that's the primary dynamic that's driving the wave height is the wind speed. The second thing to kind of keep into consideration is the fetch, which essentially is just how much distance across the water does the wind have to produce waves. So on the Chesapeake, you tend to get the highest waves when the winds are northerly or southerly, because you get the wind align with the longest fetch of the body of water. And much, much harder to get high waves on the Chesapeake when the winds are westerly or easterly. The last thing they really have to take into account, and not so much on the Great Lakes, but on the ocean and the Chesapeake, is current. If the tide is going out or coming in, or if you're sailing near the Gulf Stream, you have to be very aware when the wind is blowing against the current, because it will tend to sort of locally increase wave heights, and it will act to steepen the wave heights. And since that could be happening in sort of regionally a very small area, it may be missed. If you've looked at the wave forecast in your app, it may be actually missed or under forecast in your wave forecasting app, because it's such a localized affair. Even if you're in if you're in Florida and you're kayaking in a bay off the ocean, even if the tide is going out or coming in and you're paddling against that, it can be treacherous in some of the bays, even along the ocean, if the wind is blowing against the current or tide.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us do have a tendency to underestimate the current here on the Chesapeake Bay. I remember one time just swimming off the back of a boat in Oxford and realizing, oh my gosh, I have distanced myself so obviously the tide was going out. I swam like that to get back in the boat. And it's not really a spot where you think, boy, I really need to look out for the current, but the tides and the currents make a huge difference. And anyone who is a sailboat racer here has had a couple of really rough days, especially in light air. So might be a good time.
Right.
Grow up. We did get a question about light air on the Chesapeake, and maybe you can answer that age-old question.
Yeah, I think
why is the wind on the Chesapeake so light in August? Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, so as the season, as summer builds along, essentially the storm track, where sort of the track of which low pressure systems track across the country, moves north as summer deepens. And so what that does is that then it sort of results in kind of stale weather patterns forming along the mid-latitudes, across the southeastern U.S., the Chesapeake, even up here into the Great Lakes. And so you'll get a large area of high pressure, and it will sit there for days and days and days. And, if you were to look at a weather map, kind of back to that forecast funnel, big picture thing we've talked about, you'd see, a large area of high pressure. The isobars would be very far apart, indicating that, the large scale wind was very, very weak. And so essentially it's the storm track moving north, and then the sort of stagnant area of high pressure that's just going to settle in over the bay. Then that leads to very light, large-scale winds, and then that's where the local effects would take over. The sea breezes, the terrain would then operate in those, when the area of high pressure is in force.
That leads very nicely into Ron Chazinski's question. Can you please explain local onshore sea breeze effects on summer sailing? Our New Jersey sailing area can pipe up to 20 knots in the afternoon. Thanks.
Sure.
Well, and Ron, we're all going to move to New Jersey in the summer just for a little while to take advantage of that, because that's not something we get a whole lot of late in the afternoon on the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, it's Very common here in the Great Lakes too. Yeah, in fact, it's really in the summer dynamics where you get these large areas of high pressure that just hang around. If it weren't for onshore lake and sea breezes, we'd be doing a lot less sailing. So essentially, at its very basic level, the sea breeze is a thermally driven wind. So it relies upon the heating of the land. So it's best when you get a nice sunny day, when the large scale winds are very light, when offshore waters are still relatively cool. And it's that interplay or difference in the water temperature and the temperature of the land that causes sort of a low or localized pressure gradient. The wind flows from the water to the land. The interesting aspect of the sea breeze is that the wind that comes in off of the water and then goes up along the shore goes back out over the water and returns. And so it cycles through. It's not just lost into the upper atmosphere. So this is a sort of recurring, wind flow of in from the water, up over the land, back out over the water, sinking over the water, and then back towards the shore. When dynamics are really, really good, very easy to get 15 or 20 knots of onshore breeze from a sea breeze. And interestingly enough, and this seems somewhat counterintuitive, the best or most reliable sea breezes form when the large scale wind is offshore. So when the large scale wind opposes the lake breeze, you tend to get the most reliable and strongest sea breezes. You would think that it would weaken the flow of the sea breeze towards the land, but it doesn't. It actually strengthens it. Kind of a interesting. Sea breezes are they're sort of like wind forecasting is one chunk, and then sea breezes are a much bigger chunk. The localized winds are much more complicated than the large scale winds.
Well, Greg Guthman, it's your turn. You've asked two good questions, and Sharp, you can pop them up in any order. With all the tools, sites, and apps available now, which ones do you love, or more importantly, which do you hate?
Oh, there are, in my seminars, when I get down to the end and we're kind of, we're wrapping things up, and the last section is always about integrating all the things that you've learned through the course of the day into a forecast routine. I throw at this slide that uses I assume everyone's familiar with the turn around, don't drown logo from the National Weather Service about, not driving into standing water. And I always throw up the, turn around, don't drown, because there's so much weather information out there that you could literally get so absorbed in trying to look at all the stuff that you never get out on the water, or that you become so confused because you're looking at so many different things. So there, were a few things that I really, really like. I don't use a lot of apps, but I do like LuckGrib. It's for iOS. It's essentially a Grib reader. Wide range of forecast models available on it. Really nice interface. The guy's really done a nice job with it. I also use Expedition a lot for forecasting. I really like the control that Expedition gives of, loading the weather forecast models, controlling what the map is going to look like. It's got a lot of other features with it. The thing to remember when using apps is that the underlying data is all the same. So, if you like, Wind Finder or Sailflow or Predict Wind or Windy, or there's a million of them out there. The data is all coming from the National Weather Service or some government agency. So perhaps a little bit of an oversimplification, but most of these so-called weather forecasting apps are really delivery apps, because they're providing all the same data. It's just they're sort of changing the features and how it gets delivered to you. So what I generally recommend is, if you like Predict Wind and you like the interface and the features, great, use that. But I don't know that it makes sense to have Predict Wind, Sail Flow, Windy, Wind Finder, or something else, and be looking at all 4 of those apps before you go sailing, because essentially you're just looking at slightly the same data, slightly displayed slightly differently by the app manufacturer. I'm also, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, you can't really do a full-fledged marine forecast in a weather app. You've really got to have access to the internet so that you can look at the large-scale weather maps that come from the National Weather Service. Like, where are those frontal boundaries? Get the added knowledge from those professional forecasters, and that is data that you cannot get in an app, and it's really critical, to a really good, solid, integrated marine weather forecast.
Greg had another question. How has climate change impacted the normal storm track / the jet stream?
Yeah, and the short answer is yes. The more difficult answer is that the effect is not the same everywhere. And what it's tending to do is it's intensifying the patterns. So climate change is tending to make, droughts more severe and long-term, wet seasons, wetter. In fact, in some areas, cold seasons a little bit colder, warmer seasons a lot warmer. And then depending upon where you're at, this then sort of plays out in how the weather is, how the weather changes in your local area. So kind of hard to answer with any specificity, because it's a little bit, the impacts of climate change are a little bit different depending upon where you're at. But phenomenal change that unfortunately will continue to grow in the years to come.
Great question, Greg. Thank you. We're at last call, so we're going to take one more question from the audience. How about Nancy Davis's question there? What are the most critical National Weather Service pages to use? NDBC, I know, but what others? Thanks, Nancy.
All right, I would think that if you're staying on the Chesapeake, you should go to the Weather Prediction Center. It's one of the NOAA forecast centers. And you'd be interested in looking at surface weather forecast maps. So that's where the highs and lows and frontal boundaries are. And that's the future depiction. And those maps are available 7 days into the future. So a great long-range planning tool. If you want to know what the conditions are right now, you could still go to the Weather Prediction Center, but you want to look at an analysis map. And that will show you the latest observations of where the lows and highs and frontal boundaries are. If you're sailing offshore, you would use the Ocean Prediction Center, which offers the same sort of style of products, but then would offer those for the Atlantic, not the Chesapeake. But coastal and Chesapeake sailors, the Weather Prediction Center should be your first stop.
Wow, great questions, great answers. Anyone who wants to learn more about Mark, you can go to his website. Maybe Sharp, you can pop that up there, LakeErieWX.com, and he's got a Chesapeake Bay dashboard page there. Mark is going to give a 3-part webinar in February that we're hosting, and you can sign up for that. It's actually on our website. Yeah. Sharp, maybe you can put that into the comments so people can click on it and take a peek. But anyway, it's live. We're taking registrations for it now. It's a 3-part series on understanding and avoiding Chesapeake Bay thunderstorms. And it's $75 for all 3 sessions. And if you're a CBYRA member, you're going to get a $10 discount. So, Mark, we look forward to seeing you during your webinar. I'm going to miss the first part because of an awesome vacation that I'm taking, but I'll watch it after the fact and I'll hop in for the next one. And Sharp will be there to introduce you. But,
that's an important point, is that the series will be recorded. And then those recordings will be made available the morning after the live session. So if you want to attend, but you'll miss one or all of them, you should still register and you'll get the recording afterwards. If you have questions about the materials, then you would email me and I'll handle the questions, via email, or in some instances, I'll actually do a private Zoom meeting with people if they're struggling with a concept afterwards. So
thank you, Mark. And
well, thank you. This has been fun. Great
has
questions.
been fun. Mark warned us before the program. He said, I'm not very good at small talk. And I said, hey, Sharp and I are amazing at small talk. We'll take over the small talk piece. And anyway, you have so much to say. We could easily fill another hour with questions. Maybe after we go offline, Mark, if you wouldn't mind going back to this post, and if there are any questions we haven't quite addressed yet, I think there are maybe one or two of them that we didn't quite get to. If you could just take a peek and maybe answer them, or have
Sure.
or reach out, have them reach out to you by email to get their questions answered.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great.
That's always nice. If maybe I missed a couple, but we've come to find out that SpinSheet Happy Hour people like to talk about weather.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a great audience tonight, folks, if you really do want to dive deep into this, seriously consider the webinar that Mark's going to put on, and of course, if you want to see him live, you can go to the Cruisers University. So keep all of that in mind. I'm going to put you through. What? Go ahead.
I was going to say, I know it seems far away, but we're going to blink our eyes and it's going to be April 28th,
That's for sure. Absolutely. Okay. Well, I'm going to throw you guys in the green room just for a second.
All right.
And I'll
Have
see
a
you
great
there.
weekend, everybody. Mark, we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Great questions.
Thank you very much, everybody. We had a great crowd tonight, and especially for the questions. Thanks for participating in all of that. Just to thank Mount Gay again for their sponsorship. And I invite you, please go visit spinsheet.com or Mark's website and sign up for his webinar. Again, thanks for joining us, and be safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.